Howdy folks, and welcome back. Today we're going to jump back into Volume 4 of our Meet the Aliens series. We're going to talk about a variety of things. We're also going to preview Volume 5, which is going to cover cattle mutilation and possibly some human mutilation cases. And so that's going to get grisly and weird, and I can't wait to share that with you. In this episode, we're going to touch on a variety of things, all things alien, all the stuff that's kind of in the news, that certain news sources are covering, but in general, you'll have to dig around to find it, even though it's amazing to hear some of these things being spoken of and released by official sources like NASA or the European Space Agency. Well, the first thing that we need to talk about is something that's probably going to be out of the news permanently by the time you listen to this episode. And that's this object out in space called 3I Atlas. And that name immediately brings to mind some kind of monster that looks like some kind of Greek god with 3 giant eyes, but that's not really what the name means. The Atlas program, ATLAS, is a network of ground-based satellites that coordinate and share information, and the system is designed to provide an early warning system for asteroids. Long story short, they're supposed to be telescopes looking for things that might hit us in the near future. Risky objects flying around, zipping around out in space. The 3 refers to the fact that it is the third object that the Atlas program has spotted. So there was a 1I Atlas, a 2I Atlas, and now there is 3I Atlas. Now, 1I Atlas got that designation because it was the first interstellar object that was observed by the Atlas program. And as far as we can tell, this was a cylinder-shaped object that was tumbling end over end. It was so small and always so far away that we couldn't get a very good photograph of it. And since it was first spotted by a telescope based in Hawaii, the astronomers gave it a native Hawaiian name, a visitor from the stars, Oumuamua. So Oumuamua is the fun-to-pronounce name of 1I Atlas. Now, 2I Atlas was also interesting, but ultimately nothing earth-shattering. Obviously not literally earth-shattering, or we would have heard about it. 2I Atlas is called Borisov, and it was sort of just a weird dark comet. And there were some strange things about it, but nothing as strange as our friend 3I Atlas, which entered the solar system early this year. Now, there's all kinds of weird things about 3I Atlas. It's supposed to be a comet, an interstellar comet, the first ever observed, but it is currently, as I'm recording this, days away from its closest approach to the sun, aka its perihelion. And normally when comets reach their perihelion, they have enormous, long, glowing white tails. They're comas, which is their namesake. It's the feature they're known for. And what the coma is supposed to be is a glittering, glowing cloud of reflective water vapor and dry ice, absorbing the energy of the solar wind and reflecting the sunlight. Now, 3I Atlas not only never developed a tail, it developed what was cringingly referred to as an anti-tail, meaning there was a cloud of material that was being projected toward the sun, not being blasted away from the comet and stretching away from it in the direction away from the sun. The other thing is that despite the fact that there has been some strange silence and lack of release of data regarding 3i Atlas from our sources at NASA. Luckily, earlier this month, when 3i Atlas was very, very close to Mars, a group of amateur astronomers in Zimbabwe managed to use a really nice telescope, and the local advantage they have there being in this valley in Africa where there's the least amount of light pollution anywhere on Earth. And they were able to get a really good image. Now, they weren't able to resolve anything related to the shape of 3i Atlas, but they did show that the thing was producing its own light, and it was glowing green. Now, I don't know if you would describe this green as chloros, but it's definitely green. And I would like to think that maybe some of my listeners are astronomers, and maybe they can correct me if I'm wrong, but green is normally not a wavelength of light that is generated by the sun, and is normally not generated by stars, and is normally not reflected by comets. I don't know a lot of green comets, but I could be wrong. Now, there's one guy who has done more than anyone else to make 3i Atlas something that everyone is talking about, or at least he's trying his best, and that is an astronomer named Avi Loeb, Loeb. Dr. Loeb is one of the lead astronomers at Harvard, and Loeb has been on this case for a long time now. Loeb has been on the extraterrestrial beat of astronomy for a while, and in recent years, he has made the news by organizing and securing the funding for expeditions, very expensive expeditions. For example, he provided evidence that an interstellar object likely entered our atmosphere over the Pacific, and they were able to trace the object's impact into the ocean into a 1 kilometer square area. Loeb managed to hire ships that dredged the ocean floor, and they did recover some strange material that had been recently melted very quickly, and the composition in terms of the isotopes and the metals involved were strange and noteworthy, and Loeb wrote a paper about that. That's just one example of what he's been talking about lately. And Loeb, of course, has written multiple papers about 3i Atlas, and there's a few things that he is pushing forward as definite evidence that the object is some sort of technological product, that it's not a natural object. And one is its unusual alignment with the plane of the ecliptic. You may have heard me mention this before, but the ecliptic is just the plane of the solar system. It's the plane that all the planets orbit in, and only a few planets are a little bit out of whack with this alignment. And this happens because of gravity and because of how the solar system formed. And so most objects, like Oumuamua and 2I Borisov, those objects were not aligned with the ecliptic, and they sort of punched through the solar system at a weird angle. But 3i Atlas is a little different. It's almost like it designed a nice little package tour of the solar system, where there's a very close rendezvous with Mars, it's going to intersect with Jupiter and Venus, and the Sun. Now, interestingly, the Earth is going to be one of the omitted destinations, or so we think. This leads us to the idea of Dr. Loeb's maneuver, the Loeb maneuver, I guess you could call it. Dr. Loeb suggests that 3i Atlas is on a very interesting trajectory, and when it reaches perihelion shortly before Halloween of 2025, basically within a week of me recording this, it has an opportunity to perform a maneuver. And what that means is, if the object were to speed up at a certain point during its perihelion, it's going to be in a really great position for the sun's gravity to slingshot it directly toward the Earth at an even faster speed. The thing is already traveling much faster than typical comets or asteroids do. That's one reason we're nervously watching it. But I just want to mention that as of right now, there's no indication that the object is going to make a maneuver. Dr. Loeb was just pointing out that if this trajectory, or more accurately, if it's technological, if this journey was planned, then it's a pretty efficient maneuver to get yourself to Earth very quickly. And not only that, it'll be traveling toward us directly away from the sun. In other words, anytime we try to observe it, we'll be looking directly into the sun, which will cause problems and will prevent us from being able to make certain observations until the object is very, very close to us, which would occur shortly before Christmas. So, if the thing performs Dr. Loeb's prescribed maneuver, then it could be parked in Earth orbit around Christmas time. But let me stress that I don't think this is going to happen. I think that 3i Atlas is an important indicator of some things that we'll talk about shortly, and some things that I do think will happen in the near future. But I don't think that 3i Atlas is some sort of intergalactic welcome wagon coming to demonstrate the reality of NHI to humankind and usher in some sort of new era. I think it'll be an odd thing that scientists argue about for a while until something even stranger comes along. And so since I think that 3i Atlas will not make the maneuver and will continue in its normal course on its way out of the solar system, we will get a good view of it as it intersects very closely with another probe that we have flying out there called the JUICE probe. And so we still have some opportunity to get some photographs of it, unless we're still somehow in a government shutdown. Who knows? But that would be early 2026. Now, 3i Atlas is interesting also because it plays a role in the old story, the old suspicion, the old legend or lore in the program called Project Bluebeam. And according to Project Bluebeam, the deep state will, at some point in the near future, use some sort of astronomical event or just straight up trickery, holograms, or advanced human technology to create mass hysteria and a public perception that there's some sort of imminent alien invasion. And the story behind Project Bluebeam is that the deep state will use this hysteria to try to get more money or to keep the secrets buried or to avoid disclosure, that sort of thing. And so, based on this idea, 3i Atlas is just some sort of strange natural object, or maybe even ancient space junk from another civilization. But it's not about to crash into Earth. It's not a galactic welcome wagon. And really, it's just going to be fodder for creating more hysteria among the public. Now, my suspicion about that is that if the goal of Project Bluebeam is to cause hysteria and make people think that there's going to be an alien invasion, they're failing miserably. Nobody thinks that. Nobody's scared of an alien invasion. And the people like me who think that there are aliens think that they're already here and they've already made their deals and things are going according to their plans. There's no imminent conflict or confrontation about to happen. And along the line of Project Bluebeam is what occurred at the end of 2024 and what appears to be revving back up and will probably happen again in the fall of 2025 in November and December. And what I mean by that is the drone flap. I think we can all remember the New Jersey drones, as they were called. Strange objects the size of small cars or city dumpsters. And even though they seemed very alien and could hover and were often silent, at other times they made strange buzzing noises and they actually flashed FAA lights. Even though, for example, the one that I saw, the FAA strobe lights were not on the tips of the wings or elevators or the rudder like they're supposed to be. This one particular object had the red flashing light in the very front, in the nose, basically, in the direction it was flying, and the green in the back, which is sideways as far as I can tell. I also saw an orb drip and give birth to another orb. That was kind of weird. And where I live, there's tons of human normal air traffic. And what do you know? I haven't seen anything strange since those few days. So I'm waiting for things to come back and to heat back up again. And we've already had airport shutdowns in October of this year in Denmark and in Germany. One German official, when describing the reason why they had to close an airport, they didn't follow the deep state script. They didn't use the word drone, which is their favorite term because it's very ambiguous and could easily involve human technology. Well, this particular German official used the German word for UFO.
Das unbekanntes Flugobjekt.
So they were a bit frustrated and wanted to make it clear that these were very strange objects that were closing down the airport. Now, what are these very strange objects? Well, once again, these glowing blobs and the silver spheres that hover or zip around silently, they are all part of the same thing.
The bombers hum in distant skies, but hear the ale and laughter rise. A muted trumpet starts to play to keep the shadows far away. The clarinet spins tales so sweet of lovers waltzing down the street. The thunder rolls and sirens wail. We dance.
In World War II, they were called the Foo Fighters. Now, a post-grunge 90s band took that name on, but the term originally came from the mid-1940s, in particular 1944 and 1945, when these glowing balls or silver spheres started to follow our bombers around over Europe.
The barkeep wipes the dusty shelf and whispers of a world himself where children run through fields of green, not ruins where the bombs have been.
Dateline, Thursday, 14th of December, 1944. Headline, Floating Mystery Ball is new Nazi air weapon. Reporting from the Supreme Headquarters of the Allied Expeditionary Force. A new German weapon has made its appearance on the Western Air Front. It was disclosed today. Airmen of the American Air Force report that they are encountering silver-colored spheres in the air over German territory. Their spheres are encountered either singly or in clusters. Sometimes they are semi-translucent.
Oh, raise your glass and hold it tight. The world may burn, but not tonight. The static crackles soft and low. The radio still sings of hope. So turn the dial and let it spin. A fleeting joy amidst the din. For in this tavern, warm and bright, we outlast every stormy night.
And it appears that these spheres are sort of installed all over the world as part of an AI-powered monitoring system that's designed to keep track of human nuclear weapons. That's why these things became really active in 1944 and 1945, once humans started building nuclear weapons. And anytime humans have been threatening each other with nuclear missiles, these things kick into action. And once again, ufologists do not think that it's a coincidence that the New Jersey drone flap really kicked into high gear immediately after Vladimir Putin launched an ICBM that had a dummy warhead in it. So it was clearly a provocation to this warning system, because that particular model of missile is specifically designed to carry nuclear weapons. Well, things are continuing to slowly heat up in the world of ufology and the program and disclosure, and the disclosure of contact with NHI by the deep state. In September, we had another congressional hearing in front of various House committee members, and we had more people come forward to testify about their knowledge of reverse engineering programs and connection with NHI and the program in general. And in particular, Representatives Luna, Mace, and Burchett are championing disclosure, and they are working hard to get more information out for the public. We have new whistleblowers coming forward, although I'm having trouble with the term whistleblower. We've talked about David Grush before, the Air Force officer. Another similar individual is someone named Lou Elizondo, who wrote a book that discussed a lot of information about the program. And interestingly, his book was approved through the DOPSR process, which is the Department of Defense's system for approving the publication of material that might be deemed sensitive or adjacent to national secrets. And so the fact that Elizondo got permission to say so many things about UFOs and about our government's past interactions with NHI in the 20th century makes a lot of people think that people like Elizondo are not really whistleblowers. They're really PR people. They're the people who are coming out and saying what the Defense Department, or maybe the deep state, wants to be said. And so that's not really a whistleblower, that's more of a spokesperson. But in any case, additional spokespeople have been coming out and have been talking to journalists like this guy, Ross Coulthart. Meanwhile, real protections for real whistleblowers, i.e., changes to federal laws that would allow people to talk about the program to members of Congress without ending up in prison, those laws have been quietly voted down repeatedly in Congress in the last couple of years. So, we've been getting spokespersons, but the changes in the law that might allow for actual whistleblowers, those are not coming. And so, are we hearing what they want us to hear? Are we hearing anything remotely related to the unvarnished truth? Or are we just sort of hearing what the Department of Defense wants us to hear? It's a little frustrating. But just the fact that we have hearings and just the fact that we have actual names and places and dates and companies being named and possibly subpoenaed, that means that there's some action moving forward, some real activity. We're not just talking about what somebody heard somebody say in 1987. We're actually on the verge of finding out who stole X number of $1 billion in 2012. So it's something that's a little bit closer to home, and I think that's why Congress is interested in this. Let's not kid ourselves. I don't think that most of the people in Congress who are championing disclosure are doing so because they are concerned about humans understanding their place in the universe and that the discovery of non-human intelligence on Earth is an epoch-making event that we have to be very circumspect about. They're not thinking that way. They're basically looking for a lot of missing money. There's a lot of political hay to be made here. And luckily for people who want disclosure to happen, luckily for people who want the program to become something publicly known, luckily for us, there is a lot of money missing, and there is a huge paper trail, and all we need are people who have the access and the ambition to get hot on that trail. Well, now we need to talk about the SETI program. SETI. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Now, SETI officially goes back to the 1960s, with the first radio search being performed by a scientist named Frank Drake in 1960. And he was the first person to consider looking for radio signals that fell in the natural resonant frequency for the hydrogen atom, or the hydroxyl radical spectral lines. And that's around 1,420 gigahertz. So Frank Drake kicked off the idea of looking for alien radio signals. And with the dawn of personal computers, things really started to heat up in the 1970s and 1980s. I remember in the 90s, you could download an app that would run in the background of your computer, and it would take a little bit of SETI data, a little bit of radio signal information from whatever radio telescope was gathering information at the time, and it would use some of your computing resources to look for signatures of intelligence or technology in the radio signal. Now, as far as we know, there was no smoking gun radio signal found, and SETI is not in its heyday anymore. And it may be the result of the fact that as disclosure progresses, and as we find out more about NHI and the truly advanced civilizations that might be floating around us, we are finding out that radio signals are not the preferred method of communication. They're way too weak, way too slow, and it may also be dangerous to announce your presence to the universe like that, like we've been doing ever since the 1930s. Ever since we started experimenting with radio, we've thought about the potential for using it to communicate with NHI. As far back as 1899, Nikola Tesla believed that he was receiving radio signals from Mars when he tuned in using a directional antenna that he set up in Colorado Springs. Now, was Tesla right? I'm not going to say that he was wrong. Who knows? Who knows what was going on Mars at the time? But the biggest positive result that came out of the SETI program occurred in 1977. As we know, a lot of really cool stuff started in the late 1970s. a lot of super cool people were born in the mid-1970s. Well, in August of 1977, one of the directional radio antennas that was surveying the sky one night came across a very powerful, clearly artificial signal coming from the region of the sky where the Sagittarius constellation is. And back then, because of the limitations of computing power, their software was not recording the actual radio signal in the form of an MP3 or a WAV file. What we had instead was a series of numbers printed out on the old-fashioned accordion-folded dot matrix printer paper with the little sprocket holes on either side of the paper that you could tear off using the pre-perforation that was installed at the factory. But this one computer was simply printing out the numbers of the radio signal that it was receiving. The technician saw these numbers, read them clearly, and using a red ballpoint pen, they circled the numbers, and then in the margin of the paper, they wrote, "Wow," in big red letters with an exclamation point. Now, in one of Dr. Loeb's recent papers about Three-Eye Atlas, Dr. Loeb does point out that the WOW signal appears to have come from some sort of megawatt transmitter that was positioned approximately right where Three-Eye Atlas would have been in August of 1977. So, Dr. Loeb points out that the WOW signal may have come from Three-Eye Atlas. And based on the strength and the wavelength of the beam, it may have been doing radar survey work, similar to how we do radar surveys of other planets using the same methods. Now, we need to mention two more people in relation to Three-Eye Atlas. The first person is Jeremy Corbell. Jeremy Corbell is a guy who, I suppose he's in his 40s or 50s, and he's got these big blue earnest eyes and salt and pepper hair and a goatee. He's been big in the disclosure movement and has been a mover and shaker in ufology for years now. If you watch any of the recent congressional hearings about the program and about NHI and UAP, you'll see his face right behind the witness table, looking very serious. He's a fairly well-connected guy, and he does come out with leaks and other bits of information. And one thing that he does claim is that an intelligence agent told him that the intelligence community was very excited about Three-Eye Atlas, and they were planning to use these objects that are headed toward Earth, these strange interstellar objects that are clearly not comets and don't appear to be the normal natural debris that you see zipping around in space. Jeremy Corbell says that they're going to use these incoming objects to create a kind of hysteria or a concern in the public about possible alien invasion. And he says that no, an alien invasion is not imminent, that it's designed to scare the public into forking over more money and creating more programs that are outside of congressional oversight. And speaking of these programs outside of congressional oversight, that leads us to our second person that we have to talk about in relation to Three-Eye Atlas lately. And this is coming from our charming, intrepid Australian journalist and ufologist Ross Coulthart. Coulthart. Kind of a cool last name, if you ask me. So, Ross has been doing more digging and talking to more witnesses, and he will generally jump in after these congressional hearings and dig around to find what he can find on his own. And he has come up with a couple of more whistleblowers, or spokespersons, as you might call them, and they're talking about NHI technology. And according to Ross Coulthart, the black triangles are human-made technology. These tic-tacs, these white pill-shaped objects that can move extremely fast and move around in strange repeating patterns. Apparently, those are built by Lockheed Martin. And so we have Raytheon building the black triangles, otherwise known as TR-3Bs, part of the Aurora program that apparently started in the 1990s. And so what do we make of all this? We have these spheres, the Foo Fighters, which appear to be some sort of AI system that was installed before humans had that kind of technology. And now we have black triangles and tic-tacs that use electrogravitic propulsion and reverse engineered technology. And so they move in ways that are amazing and similar to NHI vehicles. But they're made by regular old human beings, built and tested apparently mostly in Utah, now that Area 51 and that whole part of the country became an open secret in the 2000s. They started moving their testing facilities and their secret assets to other locations, lest anyone in Congress get a little too excited and try to get too nosy. And so that appears to be where we are. There appears to be some sort of confrontation or conflict that is brewing and will be resolved in 2026 or 2027. And the conflict seems to involve who's in charge? Who's really in charge here? Is it the United States with our reverse-engineered technology? Is it some sort of weird AI planetary control system that's based under the ocean and exerts its control through these strange spheres? Are we about to be taken over by our new bosses that are cruising along on top of 3i Atlas? I don't think so. I personally think that there might be some truth to this idea of the Great Filter. In other words, what if technological civilizations like ours tend to follow a disturbing pattern? It all starts with the discovery of agriculture and the domestication of other animals. And unfortunately, what if this cycle tends to end with an angry, exploited, overpopulated planet full of pollution and the threat of nuclear war and the development of AI, which wrecks the economy? And so, what if there is a system in place where NHI intervene in civilizations whenever they reach one of these critical points? And it seems to me, somewhere around 2030, we might be reaching one of those. So is all this really about AI? Is it really about stopping an impending World War III? Does it really mostly have to do with us and our problems? Well, the good news is we'll find out sooner or later. 2027 can't get any farther away. It can only get closer. 3i Atlas is going to continue along whatever path it's decided to go along. And so these can't be permanent mysteries, thankfully. In our next volume, we're going to talk about cattle mutilation and a possible case of human mutilation known as the Dyatlov Pass incident. And I want to back up again, back to the 19th century. We were just there a minute ago talking about Nikola Tesla and his scanning Mars for radio signals in 1899. And so we can see how far back this stuff goes. The interest in finding extraterrestrial communication signals goes back to the 19th century. And I wanted to add that cattle mutilation goes pretty far back too. And what I wanted to play for you next is a preview. It follows a story of a cattle mutilation incident that occurred in Texas in 1897. And so let's take a listen to this because, there's a lot of talk about the good old days and the way things used to be compared to our sad, confusing 21st century. Well, here's an example of how I think the NHI phenomenon has always been just sitting under the surface. It's always been there. It's just that when it rears its strange or ugly head, people tend to look away. It's just not something we want to think about. Probably because somewhere in our minds we know there's not a whole lot we can do about it. And so maybe it's some sort of human psychological defense system for us to just tuck these stories away in the back of books about ghosts. But it appears that these strange things did happen and continue to happen. So let's hear what happened to this one particular family in rural Texas in the final years of the 19th century.
In an affidavit quoted in several recent UFO books and journals, Hamilton states that he was awakened by a noise among the cattle and went out with 2 other men. He then saw an airship descend gently toward the ground. And hover within 50 yards of it. It consisted of a great cigar-shaped portion, possibly 300 feet long, with a carriage underneath. The carriage was made of glass or some other transparent substance, alternating with a narrow strip of some material. It was brilliantly lighted within, and everything was plainly visible. It was occupied by 6 of the strangest beings I ever saw. They were jabbering together, but we could not understand a word they said. Upon seeing the witnesses, the pilots of the strange ship turned on some unknown power, and the ship rose about 300 feet above them. It seemed to pause and hover directly over a 2-year-old heifer, which was bawling and jumping. Apparently fast in the fence. Going to her, we found a cable about a half-inch in thickness, made of some red material, fastened in a slip knot around her neck. One end passing up to the vessel and the heifer tangled in the wire fence. We tried to get it off, but could not. So we cut the wire loose and stood in amazement to see the ship, heifer and all, rise slowly, disappearing in the northwest. Hamilton was so frightened he could not sleep that night. Rising early Tuesday, I started out by horse, hoping to find some trace of my cow. This I failed to do, but coming back in the evening, I found that Link Thomas had found the hide, legs, and head in his field that day, about 3 or 4 miles west of Leroy. Thinking someone had butchered a stolen beast, he had brought the hide to town for identification, but he was greatly mystified in not being able to find any tracks in the soft ground. After identifying the hide by my brand, I went home. But every time I would drop to sleep, I would see the cursed thing with its big lights and hideous people. I don't know whether they are devils or angels or what, but we all saw them, and my whole family saw the ship, and I don't want any more to do with them.
Well, poor cow. I feel bad for that heifer. It's also a little chilling to consider the similarities with the story of the murder of Sergeant Lovett of the United States Air Force in 1957 in New Mexico, killed by aliens. We talked about that and how Lovett's companion, who testified to the details of the incident later, said that a type of tentacle or cable was tied around Lovett's leg, and that is what pulled him up into the disc. Now, in that last story, we heard about a red wire, a red type of cable that had looped itself around the heifer's neck. Now, it's clear that this may have been some sort of faction other than the ones that we're dealing with now. Maybe these were just casual visitors, and we haven't seen their kind since then. But somehow, NHI vehicles are aware that our cattle are particularly good for nutrition or for biological experiments. This is a strange topic. And it's so strange that thousands of cattle had to be mutilated up through the 1980s before it just had to be noticed and it had to be talked about, because you had ranchers selling off their land, going into bankruptcy because they couldn't get any help from the government. And these farmers are very good at keeping predators away from their cattle. But as the farmers insisted, this was not a normal predator. And it took a journalist named Linda Moulton Howe, Howe, to investigate the cattle mutilation phenomenon for years. And in the early 1980s, Linda Howe wrote a book called A Strange Harvest. And after she investigated this for years and talked to hundreds of farmers and government officials, she reached a very strange conclusion. She determined that cattle mutilation was being conducted by some sort of non-human intelligence using advanced technology that we don't understand. And she theorized that the bovine body fluids were being used for two purposes. Number one, to create this paste that they drink, the graze. Also, there's some indication that bovine proteins and blood material are used in their experiments that they conduct on board their ships. Experiments usually involving humans. But the main point I want to end with today is that we're dealing with a very old problem. We have some new problems coming up. Humans are having to deal with extinction-level birth rates, a possible outbreak of World War III, widespread economic devastation, partially caused by AI, or definitely exacerbated by AI. And so, the next time that someone's trying to scare you about the future, just let them know, hey, the alien invasion already happened, man. It happened in 1954. Eisenhower gave in. He gave up. He capitulated. And we've been sort of living under this weird quasi-puppet state ever since. The shot heard round the world that cemented the deep state's control over the United States, and by extension, the world, was the final shot that killed John F. Kennedy in Dallas in 1963. That ended Kennedy's attempted usurpation of the Majestic 12 and the intelligence apparatus that his predecessor, Dwight D. Eisenhower, had put in place frantically in the late 1950s to basically ensure that the element of our government that was in contact with NHI and had control over NHI materials was separated entirely from the normal function of our human American government, and thus created the deep state. John F. Kennedy wasn't on board and wasn't aware of the creation of the deep state when he ran for president. When he took over in 1961, he expected some sort of continuity of power. That's not what occurred. He was stonewalled at every turn. He was seen as basically this civilian nobody who won a popularity contest and now wanted to play president. And the apparatus that Eisenhower left behind him stonewalled Kennedy, frustrated him, and when Kennedy threatened to go public, and when Kennedy started tightening the screws of budget concerns and administrative concerns that executives can tend to do, when he started doing that, they decided it would be best if a more pliable person could take over after him. And that more pliable person was a Texan named Lyndon Baines Johnson. And if there's one thing about Lyndon Johnson, he knew how to wear a nice tailored suit. He was an extremely tall man. And he had some clever things to say, but his big superpower was keeping his mouth shut, playing ball with the powers that be. And that's exactly what he did. And the deep state was able to move forward throughout the rest of the 1960s unmolested. And so, whatever happens in 2026 and 2027 will be more of a culmination of old things. It won't be the start of something new. Whatever's going on with 3i Atlas, whatever's going on under the oceans, there are lots of humans who know. They know full well what's going on. It won't be a surprise. So I guess what I'd like to leave you with is the thought that there's not a whole lot to be afraid of. There's nothing to see here. Moving on. But who knows? Maybe we can be prepared. Maybe if we read over all this old stuff, we'll find some patterns. We'll figure out what's really going on without the aid of any disclosure materials from the government. We just figure it out ourselves. We put in the work. Maybe that'll happen. Maybe if you listen to this podcast religiously enough and take very good notes, we'll get through all of this just fine. And so until next time, avoid empty country roads at night and try not to get abducted or mutilated. Until next time, talk to you later.